Welcome to Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Gemini, and we are delighted to have Joel Salatin of Polyface Farms with us this evening. Joel is an author, third-generation alternative farmer, public speaker, and activist. Polyface Farms' website states that they are in the redemption business, healing the land, healing the food, healing the economy, and healing the culture. Joel is the author of 9 books, including his popular and latest, Folks, This Ain't Normal. He also writes for magazines such as Stockman Grass Farmer, Acres USA, and American Agriculturalist. Joel's farm is featured prominently in Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, and the documentary films Food Inc. and Fresh. You can learn more about Joel and Polyface Farms by visiting his website, www.polyfacefarms.com. Hi, Joel. Welcome to Time Monk Radio Network.
Hi, thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
We appreciate you being here. The executive producer is Fox, and he will be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the Time Monk Forum are kind enough to join us this evening. Please welcome members Garden Diva, Green Meadow, Ground Rod, and Lua. This interview will be available for free on YouTube, the Time Monk Radio Facebook page, and at the website timemonkradio.com. Joel, we're going to go ahead and get started, and we're going to start with the topic of raising meat and truth in labeling, and Green Meadow has the first question for you.
Hi, Joel.
Hi.
There have been some arguments that as our population increases that we will need to become vegetarians because growing meat uses too many calories compared to growing soy, for example. I think this logic is based on the amount of time and grain it takes to raise meat with modern practices. What are your thoughts on sustainable meat eating?
That's a great opening question. All right, there are several facets to this. First of all, I think it's important to note that all of the data that demonizes meat production is based on current industrial models. That we just need to get that out of the way. Now, what's the problem with industrial models? And you'll hear this refrain throughout this whole interview this evening, and one of the big problems is that it is a segregated production model. We are the first culture in history that has had the luxury of attempting a segregated food production model. No culture in history has ever been able to do that. And what do I mean by segregated? I thought that was something, has racial connotations. Well, it just means that the compartmentalization of the components of the food production system are not integrated in any meaningful way with the waste streams or the carbon cycles or the seasonality or the energy cycles. There's no integration of anything. So let's cut to the chase here. Let's take a couple of these. First of all, chickens, poultry. Historically, poultry was a luxury because it was only able to be raised on the waste streams of the food system. That's why homesteads had chickens up next to the kitchen. Poultry was essentially, which is of course an omnivore, and has pretty high, it's a high octane feeder, if you will. Needs a lot of high energy and protein. Because of that, it was fed very sparingly because grain historically has always been extremely expensive. To produce grain with the tillage that required walking behind an ox with a stick all day, grain was extremely expensive. It's only been the phenomenon of cheap grain is an incredibly recent phenomenon. And so poultry was always a scavenger. It was the recycling stream. People didn't have garbage disposals. The garbage truck didn't come up to your house and tote stuff away to the landfill. There wasn't even any composting really until about 1940. So chickens were the ultimate recycler. And so they were a luxury item. They were for feast and special occasions only because there simply wasn't grain left, enough grain to feed poultry. And so today, if every family in America, if every kitchen in America had enough chickens to consume its waste stream, there would be no egg industry in the entire United States, and that waste stream would produce all of the eggs that Americans need. In fact, if only 15% of the American population had 6 laying hens, that would produce as many eggs as the entire egg industry. If everybody just had 10 broilers, that would produce as many meat birds as the entire broiler industry. And so as soon as you place the animals in their historically normal roles, suddenly all of these negatives that are tacked to meat and poultry dissipate, because the negatives are a very, very recent thing as well because of the segregation. Let's take pigs. Again, pigs are omnivores. Pigs were always scavengers around the edge of the farms. In Spain, of course, they still have the world's most elite pork with the Iberian peninsula pork, the black-footed hog, makes prosciutto and all these $1,000 hams and stuff, and they're raised on acorns that fall from the cork trees. George Washington had pigs at Mount Vernon. Where did they run? They weren't penned up in a pen eating grain. Grain was too expensive and hard come by, so they were in the woods eating chestnuts and acorns. And George Washington complained all the time because he couldn't ever get them all rounded up, so he'd never know how many he had. For a meticulous record keeper, not knowing how many he had was a constant frustration. But pigs have always been kind of the peripheral scavengers around the wood edges, down in the marshes. Whey, spoiled milk in a day before refrigeration. There was a lot of spoiled milk, and of course whey leftovers, and so pigs were hooked like they are today in Switzerland, downhill from cheese production facilities, so the whey could flow downhill and feed the pigs. That's where swill comes from, and slop was essentially a whey-based or dairy waste type of material. And so there again, if pigs were not segregated in confinement houses and fed, concocted grains from somewhere on the other side of the world, but were instead integrated as scavengers around the edges. So in Texas, they would eat mesquite, seeds, and in Northern California, they would eat pine nuts. And there are things all over in the Appalachians where we live. They would have acorns. There are millions and millions of acres of peripheral seed-bearing, nut-bearing stuff. I was in Australia doing some seminars a couple of years ago, and during a lunch break, I just walked out around. The 2-day seminar was in a library, and I just walked around the yard of the library. And over lunchtime, and I picked up 3 different kinds of nuts. I didn't know what they were, but I just brought my pockets full, bulging in of stuff that I picked up in 2 minutes just in the library yard. They knew what they were, but this kind of material is all over the world in copious amounts and locked away from animals. And then let's finish up with herbivores, just to finish up both dairy and beef production, and lamb and yak and buffalo and llama and alpaca and reindeer and elk. Okay, herbivore. Everybody get the picture. All right, herbivores historically have only eaten grasses. They've not eaten silage. They certainly haven't eaten dead chickens and chicken manure and dead cows. They have eaten forages. And that's why historically, virtually all cultures, the foundation of their nutrient density in their diet was either seafood or herbivore, camel, yak, whatever, was herbivore because in a day of expensive grain, when tillage was very logistically difficult, you simply could not afford to plow and to feed herbivore grain. And so whether it's the nomadic cultures in Africa, to the Native American cultures, to the Huns in outer Mongolia, all of these cultures, the reason that the herbivore is the centerpiece is because that is the only really nutrient-dense food that could be raised without tillage other than perennials like nuts and fruits and things like that. And so as soon as we take the herbivore back to its classic role as a forage-based pruner, if you will, herbivores their role in nature is to prune back the biomass to restart the fast biomass accumulation that occurs when a plant is in juvenile growth physiology. If you keep the plant pruned back too often, which is of course a product of overgrazing, then the plant of course can't metabolize very much solar energy into biomass. And if you let the plant get too old and it goes into senescence, what I call nursing home grass, then it also becomes less productive because it just carbonizes, turns brown, and doesn't do it, and doesn't it shuts down the photosynthetic activity. And so the role of the herbivore in nature is to prune back the forage, the biomass, to prune it back to restart that fast accumulation cycle. And when the herbivore is managed that way in biomimicry, like the wildebeest on the Serengeti, the buffalo in front of the wolves, the Cape buffalo in front of the lions in Botswana, when the herbivores are managed that way in what we call mob stocking, herbivorous, solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization, suddenly the production per acre triples, quadruples, or even quintuples without any petroleum fertilizer, without any plowing, any tillage, any herbicide, any pesticide, and it all runs on real-time solar dollars and actually sequesters more carbon than it exponentially sequesters way more carbon than emitted. So these are the integrated historical roles of meat production, and in all cases, poultry, pork, herbivore, in all cases, the big, instead of being a blessing, they have been turned into a liability due to a segregated philosophy of food and farming.
Well, that's very interesting. So then this argument for vegetarianism, it's really just because we're using a costly system.
Yeah, well, the truth is that tillage, that growing annuals, perennials, actually build soil and sequester carbon because their energy is concentrated in the roots, because they can't depend on seeds. They don't put their energy in seeds because they're a perennial. And so, the idea of having annuals, grain crops, vegetables, and things like that, as the mainstay of diet is quite aberrant, both in history and ecologically. Nature doesn't till. Nature doesn't have very many annuals, and there's a reason for that. Is because perennials are far more energy frugal and energy saving and carbon sequestering than are annuals, and that's why all historic tillage systems required like a 5-year perennial cycle of pasturage, between the 1 or 2 years of tillage in order to recoup the soil healing qualities that were expended during that 1 or 2 year cycle of annuals, and that was a very known axiom everywhere in the world until suddenly petrochemical fertilizers allowed us for the first time to circumvent, to kind of play a trick on nature, if you will, and circumvent that law of the ecological profit and loss statement, the ecological balance sheet, and of course, it's now proving to be pretty negative as well. But the lag time has been pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Green Meadow. Joel, this is Gemini, and I'm curious what your thoughts are regarding grass-finished beef versus grass-fed beef and the effects of grain on the cattle and ultimately the consumer.
Well, the two products are completely different, and I would just encourage anyone who's interested in pursuing this and looking at the latest science of this to look at the website eatwild.com. That is absolutely the world leader in maintaining the latest data regarding the differences between grass-finished and grain-finished herbivores. And there are amazing differences. One is in the difference of polyunsaturated versus saturated fat. Huge difference. Omega-3 versus omega-6s. And this, of course, goes across the spectrum, from eggs to dairy to butter to whatever. One of the biggest ones and most significant ones is the difference in conjugated linoleic acid. Interestingly, it only takes 14 days of grain feeding to chase the conjugated linoleic acid out of the body. Now, what's the importance of conjugated linoleic acid, also known as CLA? Is that it's as far as we know, it is the number one anti-carcinogen in nature. And this is a substance we didn't even know about until about 30 years ago. So it's a relatively new item that nutritionists now know about. But CLA is in grass-finished herbivores in large amounts, especially in dairy animals. And this explains why there was always a bugaboo for scientists who thought that red meat caused colon cancer, and yet in Argentina, where the per capita consumption of red meat is twice what it is in the U.S., believe it or not, the average Argentinian eats more than a pound of red meat a day. I mean, just think about that a minute. I mean, I'm a carnivore, but eat a pound of red meat a day. I mean, that even makes me, that's a lot. And yet they have half of the colon cancer of Americans. Why? Well, because in Argentina, everything is grass-finished, and so they have these huge amounts of CLA, whereas we don't. And so those are huge effects, and there are more than that, but I won't bore you with all of them. It's just that they are palpable, they are huge, they are well documented, and eatwild.com maintains the latest data on it.
Okay, thank you for that. And so I understand that when cattle are put on grain, it creates acidic conditions in the cattle, so sodium bicarbonate needs to be added to the grain to create a more alkaline condition. What are your thoughts on the philosophy of cattle only grazing on the nutrients grown on well-balanced soils and supplementing their diet with salt?
Well, that's my philosophy, and because it honors the historic role of as we say, the cowness of the cow. Essentially, the herbivore is a portable sauerkraut vat. What she wants to do is take in roughages, forages, and ferment them in her rumen. That's why she has 4 stomachs. When you feed her a different food substance, which of course remember that the U.S. Department of Agriculture encouraged farmers like me to feed dead cows to cows for 30 years until we had bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease, and you would think that would have gotten their attention, but it certainly hasn't. And the reason that we did not practiced the USDA recommendation, the official academic scientific community recommendation, was not because we didn't like the scientists or the USDA or because we were Luddites or anti-progressive or whatever. It was because there was no biological template anywhere in the world where an herbivore eats carrion. I mean, and that's actually enough for me. Some people say, oh, that's almost mysticism, but I think that there's a lot more wisdom in nature than we think sometimes, and we better think twice when we start adopting aberrant patterns that we can't find in nature.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah,
And
now, I will just add one very quick thing here. For the people who say, well, how in the world could we ever grow enough if we don't feed cattle grain? If we don't feed all this grain to these things, how are we ever going to grow enough? Well, a couple things. Number one is that if we didn't do all that, the nutrient density would be so high that you would be satisfied with a very, very small portion or not as much as we eat today. I mean, what's happening in our meat is the same thing that's happening in our, crackers and soups and everything else, where the soil, and I appreciate the soil in your question, because the soil has become so dead and sterilized and non-functional that the food that it's producing is also dead and non-functional, which means that it doesn't satisfy a living being that needs sustenance from it. Life creates life. You have to have vibrant life to be decomposed to a point that actually can give new life. And so we have so devitalized our soils that this craving that Americans have for more is part of our body's craving for nutrition that nothing can supply when the production model, from soil to management style, decreases the nutrient density, and that is absolutely happening in meats as well. And so, good grass finished, I can tell you, is far more filling, tiny amounts of it, far more filling than empty grain-fed fat, from a feedlot.
well, that makes a lot of sense. And to follow up a little bit on this, I've heard that the feedlot industry purchases more sodium bicarbonate than any other industry. Is there a heavy hand at play in academia and government to promote this practice to keep that industry in business, as well as to keep grain crops producing in spite of mounting opinion that most grains are not good for animals or humans?
Well, your question smacks of conspiracy, and I'm not a conspiracist. As soon as you say conspiracy, everybody says you're a whack job. So, so whenever this comes up, I always say, well, no, it's not a conspiracy. It's a fraternity of ideas, and so here, I don't think that it's a thing to prop up that industry. What it is a way to keep the animals alive. See, grain feeding acidifies the rumen of the herbivore. The herbivore actually wants a fairly basic rumen. There's about two pH levels different, and of course, every step in pH is like a tenfold, like the seismic scale in earthquakes. And so there's actually about a 2-point difference in acidity between the human digestive system and the herbivore digestive system. And if the herbivore digestive system becomes very acid, then it shuts down the fermentation. The enzymes don't work. It all turns into sterility. And so if you're going to feed the amount of grain that the industry feeds, that's why they feed so much bicarbonate, is to try to keep the gut as healthy as they can, feeding it something as unnatural as they are. So I don't think it's a thing to prop up the bicarbonate industry. I think it's a thing to try to keep the animals alive in a grain-based unnatural type of system.
Okay. Okay, I appreciate that. And next up, Ground Rod will be asking the next question.
Yeah, Joel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Carrying on with the idea of a sorority of ideas, this question's from End of the Road Farm. How does the Polyface farm method translate into different climates? Do you have any recommendations or references to good books on the subject of rotational grazing in arid Mediterranean climates like California?
All right, great question. The truth is that principles work everywhere, and so, however, they have to be adapted to specific climatic conditions. Certainly, the leading group on, to answer your question, would be Holistic Management International, HMI, Holistic Management International, founded by Alan Savory, the Zimbabwean wildlife guru who developed holistic resource management years ago, and now it's been changed to Holistic Management International, based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You can Google them up, and their forte has been working in brittle environments, which is the kind of environments you're talking about, whether they're Mediterranean, where they have a wet and then a dry season, or simply brittle environments that are just dry, like Nevada and Utah and Arizona, New Mexico. So there are profound differences. One is that in temperate areas like where we are, decomposition occurs at the soil surface. In brittle environments, decomposition occurs out at the tip, and so a dead tree actually sloughs off from the top down rather than rotting at the soil surface and falling over like it does here. So there are differences in the type of grasses. Brittle environments tend to have more bunch grasses. Where we are, they have more tillering type grasses, spreader type grasses. There's certainly different species of grasses, species of forbs as well as the clovers and all that. But the principles of mob stocking and daily moves and allowing the pruning and rest cycle to occur, those principles are absolutely the same every single place in the world. Now, the advantage of a brittle environment, the beauty of a brittle environment is that you can stockpile forage on the stem and it will remain highly mineralized, nutritious, and delectably palatable for up to 2 years. Whereas in a temperate area like we are, with high humidity and higher rainfall, once a plant reaches maturity, it begins to deteriorate rapidly. You only have about a 90-day window to harvest that plant, or it loses all its nutritive value. Simply, vaporizes away in the humidity, and it deteriorates. So the main thing I want to say about this question is, I don't have all the little nuances of answers. I will tell you that these principles are practiced extremely successfully with just as dramatic or more dramatic results in brittle environments than we have here. And the truth is, there is no paradise this side of eternity. Every place has its asset and its liability. And so one of our liabilities with high rainfall is we're always struggling to maintain fertile soil, because minerals in our soil, because so many of the minerals leach out. That's a big problem with the rainfall. In a brittle environment, they don't have a mineral problem. I mean, you shoot water to it, and boom, you've got tremendous growth. So they stockpile mineral, whereas it's easier for us to stockpile organic matter that's very hard for them because there simply isn't as much organic matter grown. So, but both systems respond to perennials, respond to management, and certainly in brittle environments, it's even perhaps more important to impound water and to eliminate runoff. P.A. Yeomans, the Australian water guru who wrote Water for Every Farm and invented the keyline system, he said that every farmer should aspire to eliminate surface runoff from their farm. That should be impounded up as high as possible and then metered out over time to keep, and that's a permaculture concept, is to keep as many raindrops as possible as high on the landscape for as long as possible, because as long as water and raindrops are kept high on the landscape, they do a lot of work on their way heading downhill through gravity. And so the longer we can hold those raindrops, the more work, the more advantages, the more leverage they do for us. And so I just encourage arid, people, arid climate areas to really put attention on hydrology and water impoundment up in high valleys and high swales in order to eliminate that surface runoff.
Yeah, good answer.
I was just in New Mexico, just west and north a little bit of Santa Fe last weekend, and when you drive through that country, it's so different than ours here, but you have those huge arroyos, just these huge, you just see these big causeways on the road, and these big arroyos underneath, and you say, my lands, does that ever run? And then the locals will tell you, oh yeah, it overflows, it runs. And so they get water. The problem is that with the overgrazing and the lack of vegetation now, the lack of organic matter, the water just runs off. And so, I was there near the big nuclear facility, Los Alamos, and they told me that their budget was, $12 billion a year. And I thought, my lands, if all the money that was spent in upgrading nuclear bombs there were instead turned into, on the land, multiple, not large, millions of ponds up in the high country around there to hold that surface runoff, they could turn that country back into Eden instead of continuing the desertification. No culture in history has ever desertified more acres more dramatically, faster than the United States.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, I got another question here from forum member Cowpoke. How do you deal with predators, especially raptors, which like to lunch on free-ranging chickens? How many chickens do you lose to predators, and how do you discourage predators?
Sure. Great question, and I appreciate the gear shifting too. That's fine. We can be all over the board before this is over. So there's a multiple approach to predators. First of all, we do everything we can to make sure the predators are well fed. What that means is that we maintain a very healthy forestal zones out next to our pastures. We maintain healthy, thick sward, thick sods with our long grass grazing. It means that our grass is very, very long and stimulates the production of moles and voles and chipmunks and ground squirrels and things like that. The point is, the first goal is an environment that is balanced, a good ecology that has lots of little mammals and things for the predators to eat, so they're not hungry all the time. Number two, we do have a nocturnal guard dog, and he is worth his weight in gold. He sleeps most of the day and lounges, but at night he's out prowling, and he essentially runs the farm and handles predators. And we just very seldom have a predator problem, because he's around. Number three, in the range poultry, when they're in the feather netting and therefore not enclosed and open to the air, we run guard geese, and geese are also fairly nocturnal. They never sleep like a chicken, and so they're always on guard. And we've watched them, fight off hawks and great horned owls and things. You see piles of feathers. I don't know if they ever killed one, but they're extremely aggressive, and they love to guard poultry. They're just nuts. And when one is with a batch, and we come in the hoop house for the winter and don't need the goose, or when we say slaughter a batch, and suddenly there's no chickens there, to guard for a while. The geese go, they walk, they come up around the house till they find a group of chickens to guard. I mean, they're just uncanny that way. And finally, I would say this, that one of our greatest deterrents to predators is that we have a farm that has a lot more people per acre than the average farm. The average farm in America, you drive up to it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, honk your horn, nobody's around. The farmer's in town working a town job so he can support his farming addiction. And we think that having a lot of people on the farm with a lot of activities and a lot of production going on, a lot of diversified production, there are people around all day, and so we are simply creating a human presence in the landscape. And I'll just say here that I think it's a misnomer in our culture now that the radical environmental agenda has pretty much latched on to ecology, land management by abandonment. That human abandonment is the most noble way to manage the ecology. And we know now from much more materials, from Guns, Germs, and Steel to the book 1491 to An Ecological Indian to Fire in America to all these wonderful books that are out now anthropologically and archaeologically, showing that there really is no place on the planet that has not been aggressively massaged. I mean, now we know that the Amazonian rainforest is not some natural thing. It was a planted garden, by these old huge civilizations of people that were there, before the conquistadors came. So we think that it's a very good landscape policy to have a production model that places way more humans on the landscape than the average industrial farm places. I mean, the average industrial farm is gobbling up farms. You go out through the heartland of America, through Iowa and Illinois, and I mean, you just see abandoned house after abandoned house after abandoned house. Places that used to support a family every 100 acres, and now there's not even enough kids around. You have to amalgamate 3 school districts and bus the kids 2 hours one way to school just because there's nobody around, and I think it's tragic.
Good answer. Lots of good ideas. So have you been losing many animals to predators? No, indeed. We lose very, very few. Now, once in a while you'll have an attack, and we don't mind the random thing. Most hawks are kind of just lazily passing through. They're just easy, trying to find something easy, and they move on someplace else. I'm not at liberty to tell what our most drastic measures are, but I will just say that we are believers
that humans are also part of the ecology.
Yeah, definitely. Out here in the wilds of Montana, I've got a few chickens out in the yard right now. We have eagles and hawks, and so far so good. Wolves, coyotes, mountain lions. Been concerned about it, but so far so good.
Good, good. Well, I'll tell you, a good guard dog
Yeah.
is. We have three of them. We pretty much have guard dogs now everywhere we have pastured poultry. We lease 8 farms, so we have numerous tracts of land that we operate that are not here contiguous or nearby home base. We have former interns running those farms, and every one of them has a guard dog. Either they provide it or we provide it, and we are just really, really sold on guard dogs.
Me too. Just one more quick question from forum member Phoenix. Has the Polyface method been successfully used in Australia? Is there a role for sheep or kangaroos in an Australian Polyface scheme?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I've been to Australia 3 times in the last 2 years. I'm going back this fall and again next spring. There's a tremendous amount of interest in Australia, and there are a lot of people adopting these methods, and they're just as successful as here. And they do sometimes, use different species. Interestingly, the Australians have just discovered an 1820 diary of a British agronomist who came in the first wave of colonists when it was started as a penal colony for Great Britain, and traveled Australia taking readings of soil organic matter. And the science of that was very well developed by 1820, and it's essentially the same as we use today. So what's exciting about this is that we know that this is the scientific methodology of this is pretty much as good as we do today. And he found that the average organic matter in Australia in 1820, are you ready for this? 20%. 20% organic matter. Today, it's 1%. And I asked him when I was there last, I said, look, you guys didn't have the large, well, now they know that they did have megafauna there. They're finding bones and all sorts of things that indicate they had a prolific amount of megafauna there, long time ago. But as recently as the 1820s, what they said was that where the United States here, where we had buffalo, for example, there they had tons of species. Actually, they had entire species of marsupials, small marsupials. Of course, a kangaroo is a marsupial. But when I say small marsupials, I mean there were numerous that were less than the size of a possum. Many of them the size of a vole or a mole. And they said that the country was literally alive. When you walked through those perennial grasses, that it was very much like American prairie in its native state. That it was just literally alive with all of these little mammal marsupials, and of course that's what the Aborigines ate. They catch them on a stick and roast them over a fire and pop them in like marshmallows, and that is what created the disturbance that stimulated the prairie to be productive. It was not primarily the kangaroo. I've eaten kangaroo. It's great, and I know that there are plenty of people there who would like to see a lot fewer kangaroos today. There are now, by most estimates, when you go to Australia, they'll tell you there are probably today, 10 times as many kangaroos as there were in 1900, due to the tillage, the annuals, and the grain, and making it much, much easier for the kangaroos to to thrive.
Oh, that is quite a statistic. That doesn't sound like it's normal today.
No, the soil. I mean, if you think of 20% organic matter soil, that'd be almost like walking on compost. Can you imagine?
Yeah, exactly. Just a quick follow-up here. What was the breed on the dog again you recommended?
I mean, there are numerous breeds out there. Probably the most popular is the Great Pyrenees. We happen to have an Akbash Anatolian Shepherd cross. It's a Turkish base from Turkey, but Anatolian Shepherds are wonderful. Akbashes are wonderful. Great Pyrenees. There are. I can't think of more. I know there are more, but I can't think of one right now off the top of my head. But there are numerous of these, and they're all quite good.
Thank you so much, Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ground Rod. Joel, we're going to move on to the topic of soil and food, and Garden Diva has the next question.
Hi, Joel. I live at the northern end of the Shenandoah Valley, so it's nice to talk to you. This question is from one of our forum members, Phoenix, and is asking, is it possible to grow vegetables and grains without tilling the soil?
Well, if you ever read the Ruth Stout No Work Garden book, you would say it certainly is. She simply used mulch all the time. She didn't grow grains, but for garden vegetables, yeah. And we actually used her method for quite some time until in the leaves that we got from down at the city dump pile, we got some wiregrass, and that wiregrass you could put 6 feet of mulch on, and it would eventually come through and grow at the top. And the only thing that kills it without chemicals is tillage. It's very, very susceptible to tillage. And so, we began spading and things. And of course, Elliot Coleman, who is arguably the guru of gardening in the U.S., along with, John Jevons, the biointensive method. I don't know anybody that doesn't do tillage. And what they would say is that the tillage is okay as long as you're compensating with copious amounts of organic matter. And in all of their cases, they are bringing in. I mean, Elliot Coleman goes down to the beach and brings in seaweed. They are bringing in from some perennial place, whether it's leaves or straw, or not straw, that would be an annual, but leaves or grass, grass clippings, hay, bringing in copious amounts of organic matter from a perennial source in order to augment the loss of organic matter from the tillage. Interestingly, Rodale has done a fair amount of research on this, field research. It's quite fascinating, where using smother crops, and there are certainly some very fascinating studies that have been done, and I think that are areas that could be explored on a grand scale, and that is where you, for example, plant a smother crop of, say, hairy vetch and rye acting as a trellis for the hairy vetch to climb up on, the hairy vetch being a legume, so it's pulling in nitrogen, which helps to feed the rye, and the rye, of course, being, say if you use a long stem rye, you're going to get a taller trellis. The two are symbiotic plants, so you let this grow, and then you go in. You don't mow it. You simply go in with a kind of a masher, if you will, and crip it up and plant right into that, and and grow plants. Now, one of the most interesting place that I saw was my next to the last trip in Australia. A guy named Colin Cease, who has developed a system that he calls pasture cropping. and he's actually invented a tool. And there are now some nutrient implement designers around the country that are actually trying to create a tool that'll do this. And I think it has been created. But pasture cropping essentially uses a shoe, a simple, like a 1.5 inch wide shoe, to rip open the sod. What you do is you graze it, and then you graze it again too soon to actually weaken the sod, weaken the grass a little bit, the pasture. And then you run this tool down through that just rips a little 1.5 inch wide strip to plant a small grain, say barley or wheat or rye or something in. And because the grass has been retarded due to grazing it sooner than energy equilibrium was reestablished, it allows the annual to germinate and jump up ahead of the pasture. And all you got to do is get it ahead of the pasture, and it will outcompete, because an annual, tends to want to grow faster than a perennial, and it'll outcompete it and shade it, which of course also retards the grass. So now you have a growing annual crop that's nourished or mulched, if you will, by a sequestered perennial that never got killed. And I was out in a field, a 200-acre field of what was it, barley, I think it was. Maybe it was wheat. Was it wheat? No, I'm sorry, it was oats. No, I don't know what it was. Oats. All right, get my story straight. That doesn't really matter. He does all of them. But anyway, this particular field was oats, 200 acres. And what's amazing is the production per acre is identical to a clean-tilled, chemically produced model. He runs the combine across it. Well, by the time the oats were ready to combine, of course, the oats started to desiccate and turn brown. Well, that now opened up the canopy to allow more light in underneath the oats, which stimulated the pasture to come on. So by the time the oats were ready to combine, the pasture was back to 16, 17 inches tall, right under the oat heads. So the combine snipped off the oat heads, and now you already had a nice 14, 16 inch long, thick, dense pasture sward underneath that you could go right in with animals and regraze. And what he's found is that as long as he only does this once every 5 years, because even at this rate, it is still an energy depleting system to take that annual off. But at one every 5 years, he's actually building soil and building organic matter. And he's found there's actually a symbiotic relationship. This one intrigues me. The symbiotic relationship in doing that once every 5 year rip up through the field, it actually is creating hundreds and hundreds of miles of edges for mycorrhizae and mycelium fungi to colonize on. And he's actually getting a burst of pasturage on the off years due to the once every 5 year, disturbance factor. So it really is quite fascinating. And I think that as energy costs increase, as soil becomes, as we start, realizing we better hang on to our soil as it becomes more and more precious, and as we start being forced by economics and by, environmental factors to begin going back to real-time carbon fertility cycles, solar-driven systems, I think that these kind of systems are going to become more and more normal, and there's going to be a tremendous amount of exciting development in these what I call a much lighter footprint kind of system. Now, you say, well, every 5 years, how can we ever grow all the grain that the world needs? Look, the world doesn't need all the grain that it grows. I mean, that's the big thing you have to understand. Now we're going back to an integrated system. As soon as we go to an integrated system, suddenly, and a normal, take herbivores off of grain and do them under intensive perennial pasture management that is every bit as productive as grain to produce the same amount of milk or meat per acre, then suddenly we don't need but about a fifth or a seventh of the grain that we produce, for baked items and grain, and for supplemental, for poultry and pork as a supplement only. And suddenly, when you go to that kind of approach, and you drop your grain production by that much, then suddenly these systems actually do work, and they do feed the world, and they run on real-time solar energy.
Great, thank you. So I guess in a world where we were doing things ideally, people like me who have a garden would not be bringing in manure, as I have done in some years, from local horse farms or farms that I even got some from a llama farm. But we would be, as you said, growing cover crops and using our leaves and doing all that sort of thing instead.
Yeah. I mean, just imagine that in the last 60 years, 70% of everything that's gone into landfills in the United States is biodegradable, is compostable. Imagine if over the last 50 years, if all of that material that's accounted for 70% of what's gone in landfills, if all that material had been composted or recycled through animals or, some way, had never gone into landfills and been instead utilized as a soil rebuilder. Just imagine what a different area we'd have.
I hope I see that in my lifetime. Thank you.
You and me both. You and me both. That's right.
Thank you, Garden Diva. Up next is Lua.
Oh, thank you. Joel, good evening. Decay and bacteria, you were just talking about, the things in the landfill, et cetera. The decay and bacteria are really a very important part of the soil food network. How do you foster a healthy lifestyle in the soil?
Well, the soil likes to be fed on top of its head. And again, we've I hope that I've successfully demonized tillage here this evening. That doesn't mean that you can never till, but it means that you want to do it very, very judiciously and as a last resort, if you will. And so one of the main things is to simply reduce tillage as much as possible and move to perennials. There are so many perennials that you can use. From berries to orchard, we just edible landscaping. We just don't use perennials like we should, and so that actually brushy things produce more carbonaceous material per square foot even than trees. And so the number one, the fastest biomass accumulator is grasses and forages. And so, for example, if you had a backyard and you were in an urban setting or a suburban setting and you had a yard situation, ideally what you would do is let most of that grass grow as tall as grow clear to full physiological expression, clear to seed head. I mean, can you imagine the beautification committee having fun with that, of a homeowners association? They have a conniption, wouldn't they? But
yeah.
that is the way to accumulate biomass on site. So the soil likes to be fed on top of its head. It does not like tillage. It wants to be fed on top of its head. It doesn't like stuff tilled in. It likes mulches. It likes, think about how nature builds soil. And it likes mulches that are lignified in carbon, that they're not green. The only thing that falls on the soil in nature is brown grass, brown leaves, and brown pine needles. You don't see green leaves, green pine needles, and green grass falling on the soil surface. It's all brown. The cellulitic structure is lignified, and that only comes when a plant reaches physiological maturity. It moves from proteinaceous to starch, and as it moves from protein to starch, it releases the energy, which is the energy necessary to feed the bacteria in the soil. Bacteria are primarily proteins, and these bacteria, the protein in the soil doesn't feed on protein; it feeds on energy. We feed on protein. We don't need a lot of energy. An omnivore needs more protein, and that's one of the advantages of an herbivore. An herbivore doesn't need protein. What they need is energy, so they can take this cellulitic structure and they can ferment it. You and I can't eat what an herbivore eats. We wouldn't perform on it because we have a totally different digestive system. So, the reason grasshoppers can jump like they can, and crickets and the proteinaceous bugs can do, an ant can carry, what is it? If a human, if a human could lift as much of an ant, like, the average human could lift like 1,000 pounds and walk off with it. Where do they get this incredible energy? Well, they are primarily protein-eating energy. And so it is those old plants. It is that brown, the soil likes to be fed brown stuff. And so whether we're creating a cover crop, whether we're letting the lawn go, so we can get biomass generated, or bringing in leaves or whatever, what we want is brown material. And so that's how we maintain that healthy life cycle in the soil.
Well, that's really fascinating. I would have thought quite the opposite. Thank you very much for that. I have a question for End of the Road Farm. They've asked, you've talked about fake food and how it doesn't decay and feeding your bacterial colony in your digestive system. Could you expand on that subject for people who haven't heard about it and possibly give some examples of what your family does?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, if food won't rot, essentially our digestive system is a decay cycle. I mean, we see decay happen in a compost pile. You see decay happen in when milk spoils. But all of this is indicative of a digestive or a decay cycle, and our digestion is no different. It's a rapid decay cycle. And if food won't rot, then it won't decay. And if it won't decay, then it won't digest. One of the most fascinating places I was in the last year, I was out in California at a place where two ladies are operating a farm school deal with the local middle schools, doing a curricula in the environmental sciences program. And so they have this it's pretty good size, almost 3 acres, I think, a farm that the students come out to as part of their classes. And so the first time the students come out, they say, bring us some food. So the kids bring, their Twizzlers and Twinkies and Cheerios and Cocoa Puffs and white Wonder Bread and this stuff. And so at the farm, they have this great big box that's about 2 feet high and 3 feet wide and 6 or 7 feet long, and it's a vermicomposting box with red wigglers in it, worms. And so they'll open this box, they talk a little about the worms. They're going to feed the worms, so they have the kids, put all their food items in there on the one end. And then the farm ladies, they of course prep for this, and they put in an apple on there, and they put in an apple. They put in a fresh stone ground whole wheat, bread. They put in a banana. They put in a tomato. They put in a pound of ground beef. Okay. And they put it all in, they cover it up, and they close the lid. Kids come back 2 weeks later, and of course, they know that they're going to go. The whole point was to go and see what the worms did. And so the kids all run to the box, they open the lid, And the two ladies that run the farm say, okay, now let's look at your site, see what they did. So they start pawing in there. Well, out comes the Twinkies, out comes the Cheerios, out comes the Cocoa Puffs, out comes the M&Ms and the Twizzlers and the the Wonder Bread and the white ball. It looks like a softball. Nothing's changed. It's all the same. So they go over to the other end and dig in there, and there's nothing there. It's all gone. It's all turned into castings, and of course, and the kids are just getting this kind of intuitive epiphany, and the two lady teachers, and they after it's sunk in a minute, and they say, now you tell me, young people, why would you want to eat something that worms won't even eat? And it was just so fresh and such a powerful object lesson for them that I just think that's wonderful. And to me, it really makes the point that indeed, look in the mirror. Why would we want to eat things that worms wouldn't eat?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Lua. We are speaking with Joel Salatin of Polyface Farms. You can learn more about Joel by visiting his website, www.polyfacefarms.com. You will find a wealth of information, including his latest book, Folks, This Ain't Normal. Joel, next we're going to move on to growing farmers, and the next question is with Green Meadow.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Joel. It has been said that the average age of the American farmer is 65 years old and that we need more young farmers and ranchers. There's a lot of interest in small farming in my area in southern Oregon, but many are failing. A large percentage of the local farmers qualify for food stamps. Non-paid internships and volunteering is illegal here to prevent abuse. Also, weather can be erratic and costs and success vary from year to year. So, two questions. How can farmers learn, and how can new farmers be profitable and resilient to the ups and downs of farming?
Oh boy, I was hoping we wouldn't get to this question. This is a tough one. This is a tough one. I'll tell you one of the reasons why is we run an internship program. Let me just say right off the top that the quote unquote safety net, or the abuse prevention net, if you will, in our culture is so overboard now that it is absolutely destroying innovation. All innovation starts from an embryonic prototype, and if you don't allow small-scale stuff, educational opportunities, business opportunities, cheese-making opportunities, whatever. But if you don't allow embryonic prototypes, then you stifle innovation, which is what we need more than anything. So I do not agree in the internship or volunteering being illegal. I understand the situation, but I think the cure has become much, much worse than the disease. And so with that said, I'm a firm believer in interning. And I guess I would say we need some civil disobedience here to to create some wiggle room so people can learn. I mean, last fall we take internship applications for 14 days a year, from August 1 to August 14. And last year we had almost 100 applicants for 8 spots. I mean, it is now far easier to get into Harvard and Yale than it is to become an intern at Polyface. Now,
Wow.
Maybe we're a little different than most, but I go to a lot of places and see a lot of farmers, and I'm hearing similar numbers. There is just a desperate sense, I think, among young people who are wanting to do something noble and sacred with their life, something healing with their life, that are looking more at sacred work vocation rather than economically beneficial vocation. And somehow these young people need to learn. And historically, one of the best ways to learn was internships and mentorships. But our government bureaucracy, our societal love affair with government has shut down the most efficacious, or has, I should say, stymied the most efficacious way to learn. And so I would suggest that all of the foodies and the slow food movement and the environmentalists and the environmental science folks, get on the understanding here that a more libertarian approach in the marketplace of production and ideas might be the best solution we could come up with. And if we brought all of that power to bear on this issue, then perhaps there would be an explosion of opportunities for new young farmers to learn and new young farmers to start. What's happening with us is that we're kind of the old dog in the woods here, and we have a good reputation. Been here a long time, many decades, and so now what's happening is people are offering us their farms to manage, because, and this is a segue into the next part of this answer, is that there is a tremendous amount of land available in the U.S. right now. This whole abandonment of land is huge. Cornell did a study about 5 years ago. It was a 2-year study, and they looked at how much active farmland was now no longer being farmed in the last 15 years. They wanted to see the number of acres that was actively farmed 15 years ago, and not only was not being farmed, but it was not developed, it was not paved over, it was just abandoned land. It's no longer farmed, just abandoned. And in New York State alone, the number was 3.2 million acres. We had an apprentice finish with us, went back to upstate New York. His family was around the Ithaca area. He went back home, and within a month of going home, 3 different landowners approached him and offered him a total of 1,000 acres rent-free. Just please come and do something with my land. We have numerous interns that have left us and gone, some from California to New York to wherever, and the land is out there. There's a tremendous amount of underutilized or abandoned land. More and more land is being owned by people who don't have a background in farming. They make their money in the e-boom, the e-commerce, the whatever. And, what do you do when you have a pile of money? Well, you buy land. I mean, that's the ultimate American dream, buy some land. So more and more of the, rural land that's being sold is being bought by non-farming people. And, they finally get tired of I ran into a guy the other day that is managing 150 acres that are all neighbors. This is 150 acres, and they don't do those neighbors. All they do with that 150 acres, I mean, I don't know how many neighbors it is. Let's just say it's 6 or 7. All they do with that 150 acres until he came on board was just mow it. They mowed it like 3 times a year. That's insane. That's insane. And so there's a tremendous amount of land availability. I read about a PhD student in Alabama who drove across the state and just looked for what looked like abandoned farms, unkempt farms, and stopped and knocked on the door and asked if he could lease the farm. And in every single case, he stopped at like 30 farms across the state of Alabama that he just, could see from the road, just in a random traverse of the state. And every single one asked him to come and do something. My best story is an inmate in Pennsylvania who wrote me. I get a lot of letters from prisoners, inmates, and I've always given all my books free to them every time they write, because I'm opposed to prisons and think they should be abolished. And anyways, that's another topic for another day. But anyway, this prisoner wrote me, and he was getting ready to get out, and he didn't have any land and wondered where to start. So I told him about think about your boyhood, where you grew up, where do you want to go back to. You know anybody? He wrote back, said, yeah, I know three farmers there that I kind of knew as a kid. I said, well, write to him. So he wrote to him and told him he was getting ready to get out of prison, and of course they remembered him. All three not only wrote him back, but said, yes, I'm getting old now. My kids don't want the farm. Please come and do something with this land. And this was to a prisoner, a convicted felon. All right, and so my point is, there is so much land out there that what you have to do is realize that that there's no free lunch. Farming is not getting up at 10 o'clock and having Starbucks coffee on the veranda at 11 o'clock. You're going to have to work at it, and you're going to have to work smart, and you have to run it like a business. And it's just like any other business. There are economies and efficiencies, and one of the reasons we run our internship program is to teach these principles. I get onto these farmers, and I watch either time frittered away, or I watch inefficiency. It's painful to watch the inefficiencies. Are these guys doing time motion studies? I mean, when you read Elliott Coleman's a produce guy, and he's made excellent money with his produce operation, and he does time motion studies. You read his books, you go, why this guy, knows how long it takes to plant a foot of carrots and harvest a foot of carrots and sell a foot of carrots. Here we have benchmark time motion studies. You should be able to put away 30 dozen eggs in 20 minutes. At the most 30 minutes. You should be able to move chicken shelters at 60 seconds per shelter. We have all these benchmarks, and you know what? Not 1 in 10 of our interns, and we get the cream of the crop, not 1 in 10 times themselves to see if they're hitting any of our benchmarks. I mean, we have this desperate need in our culture to get serious about this and not play games with that farming is some sort of a thing that is so noble and sacred, that the world owes you a living. No, get off of that. We had, I'll finish with this. We had a guy here in the state last year, who was able to ink a deal with some restaurants in North Carolina across the state line for pastured poultry, but they needed way too more than he's a better marketer than a farmer, and so he wanted to leverage his time marketing, and so he looked for somebody who would contract grow these 2,000 pastured broilers for him. He started talking to neighbors that he knew raised pastured poultry. No, they wouldn't do it. His circle got wider. Finally, it got up to us. We're 100 miles away, and he gave us the deal, and we pushed the pencil on it in a minute and realized, well, this is a great deal. We said, yeah, we'll raise them. He said, you're the first farm that's willing to raise my 2,000 birds for me so that I can sell them to these restaurants in North Carolina. Now, I'm all about local food, but I'm also not dumb, and here's a guy that's got a crackerjack opportunity for somebody to make 25 to 30 bucks an hour. They don't even have to do any marketing. They don't even have to do any processing or butchering or anything. Raise them in the field, and he went through 30 pastured poultry producers till he found us willing to raise those 2,000 broilers for him. I don't understand. These kind of things, I just throw up my hands and say, I don't understand what's the problem here. Are we in business, or are we some sort of victim of whatever? let's get with it and quit making excuses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Green Meadow. Joel, Garden Diva has the next question.
Yep.
I live in West Virginia, about 100 miles west of Washington, D.C., and during all this housing boom that we had over the last 10 years or so, a lot of our farmland was sold to developers here. And after talking to some real estate agents here, a lot of it is just going to be sitting there and not be sold. So what I want to ask you is we have a group here that'd like to find a way to get new farmers on some of that land. And have you seen any activity like that in any of your travels around the country?
Another great question, and it's a little bit similar to the one above. You're not alone in this need. I think the weak link in this, the weak link is not the land. Obviously, the land is there, and it's not a market or a spirit. I mean, you're obviously showing you're ready to jump in, and there are citizens ready to do this. Unless I'm missing something, my intuition is that the weak link is finding the competent entrepreneurial farmer. I mean, you don't want a farmer that's just going to raise corn and soybeans. What you're looking for is somebody who's really going to make a beautiful landscape. I mean, essentially, if my take is that if a farmer knows how to make a beautiful place, they will never lack for land. And I think one of your weak links here is finding the farmer. Now, there's a slow money. I don't know if you're familiar with slow money. It kind of grew out of slow food. But there's a whole slow money organization and movement now headed by Woody Tash, who wrote the book Slow Money, and they have some matchmaking things going on, and I'm a firm believer in tribalism. I think you've got to go to a tribe that works. And by that I mean, go to really successful farms maybe that are running intern programs and see if they have an intern ready to jump on this. Don't ask me because we have a stack. We've even got letters from 80-year-old farmers wanting us to find them a young person to inherit their farm to. They're desperate for these. And I think one of our problems is that we have a tremendous amount of opportunity here, but right now we're really lacking in the number of competent entrepreneurial young farmers that can actually make a business out of a farm that looks like the kind of place that a group of interested people want to see on that land. I mean, sure, there's always somebody that will just continuous graze cattle or plow it up or whatever, but I know that's not what you're interested in. And I don't know a lot of groups. I mean, Pennsylvania has a great matchmaking program for retiring farmers and young farmers. There are groups around. If you Google beginning farmer, I'll bet some of these groups would pop up. But all of my experience with them is that there's more land available and there's more citizen involvement than there is competent entrepreneurial young farmers to jump on it. We come back to this. And I don't have an answer for you for that except time. It's just, and in fact, you all would enjoy knowing that my next writing project, I think you'd enjoy knowing, my next writing project for this winter is going to be a book on internship, apprenticeship, and mentoring. And because it is legal in many, many places. It's certainly legal here in Virginia. And I find it fascinating that the whole historical apprenticeship program was developed during the guild period and the the middle. Well, I mean, obviously it predates that, but I mean, apprenticeship journeyman kind of credentialed as we know it today really grew out of the guilds, and the reason for them was to create a craft for the other children in a family in a time of primogeniture, which is of course the European inheritance idea of primogeniture is where the firstborn gets the lion's share of everything, in order to keep the land intact and not have it broken up. What do you do with the other kids? I mean, what do you do with them? And so the formal apprenticeship, the European style apprenticeship, like we know it in there and in colonial, early America, was a means of taking the second, third, and fourth born sons in that day, and providing a trade and a craft so that they would have a place to go off the farm and ply their trade. I find it fascinating that today it's a reversal. It's people who know a trade or a craft or an something, and it is the most efficacious way in the farming for them to get hands-on training. It's a reversal of that historical use of apprenticing. But there are plenty of trades that use apprenticing as well still today. But I find it fascinating that there's such a need for it in farming. And I wish I had a real simple answer for you. I don't know. I haven't seen all the models that I've seen have been overlanded and over citizen interest and under farmered. Every single one of them I've seen, and I've seen quite a few.
Well, that's very useful to know. Thank you. Thanks, Joe.
I'm sorry I can't be more encouraging, but that's what I've seen, and I don't know a way to I don't know how to change that. What do you do? I mean, I can't snap my fingers and say let's have 50,000 bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, self-starter young farmers ready to go next week. I mean, it doesn't happen. We haven't gotten where we are overnight. We won't get out of it overnight. But I can assure you that that if things continue the way they're going, and I know there are other questions coming up about economic instability and energy costs and healthcare, wellness problems, and if those trend lines continue the way we see today. I just read a big article in the paper today about that they're expecting obesity to continue to increase exponentially, dramatically over the next decade or two, at least for the foreseeable future. If that trend line does continue, we're gonna see needs for these kinds of things like you're talking about, like we haven't seen in a long time.
True. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garden Diva. Joel, we're going to move on to a topic of economics affecting food, and Lua has a question for you.
Thank you. This is a question for Raw Truth on the forum, and it has to do with the worldwide financial implosion that we've been expecting to occur over the next few months. His question is, what kind of social organizations do you think might be helpful as economic instability increases in order to prevent starvation and establish new ways for people to meet their basic needs? And this is not referring directly and specifically to farmers, but it's referring to how each individual family might be able to meet their food needs.
Yeah. Like social. In other words, familial social restructuring. See, I'm a big believer that that ultimately many of our problems have been that where we are as a culture, we have strayed from the home as the nucleus of life. And I know I'm sounding terribly old-fashioned here, but hear me out. That home, that when we say home now, the average person basically views it as simply a pit stop place between everything else that's important in life, rather than the historical view that it was the epicenter of life and essentially a launch pad for other things that were also important. So the family ate together. The family gardened together. They preserved food together. They butchered animals together. They entertained together. They didn't go out to movies. They told stories. They did skits. I mean, read Little House on the Prairie books. And then this spread out to the social community. I mean, can you imagine your township for entertainment having a spelling bee down at the social hall for entertainment on Thursday night, or having a poetry night where everybody brings their favorite poem and shares it? I mean, when you look at these kinds of social network glues that has been, I would say, supplanted today by our Hollywood culture. I mean, we have a situation in our culture today where the average American is far more knowledgeable and impassionately interested in the latest, belly button piercing in Hollywood celebrity culture than what's going to become flesh of their flesh and bone of their bones at 6 p.m. And so then the obvious question becomes, if that's the social organization that historically has prevented starvation, that has created civilizational glue, that has created stability, if that, then what would it take for us to get there? And I would simply say that it'll take more disturbance than we have now. And if you all think that we're heading into a time of economic instability, we may be, we may not. But the one question I refuse to answer is prophecy. I'm not a prophet. I don't prophesy. I collect experts who do prophesy, and they're usually very, very foolish. Like Tom Watson, the CEO of IBM in 1966, who said the worldwide need for computers was for about 5 computers. This was the CEO of IBM in 1966.
Uh-huh.
So I collect this stuff. So I don't prophesy, but I do look at trends, and I do adhere to the Chinese saying that if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to end up where you're headed. And I think that a nation going the way we are, printing funny money, and with the debt that we have and the expenditures and the high taxes, I do think that if we keep going the way we're going, we're going to end up having a problem. And in fact, let me just say this: if we had not bailed out the banks, if we had not bailed out Chrysler, if the government would quit intervening in the marketplace this way, picking winners and losers, we would have our shall we say, our come to Jesus disturbance faster and actually less devastating than it will be if it's delayed and delayed and delayed, and improprieties and foolishness are propped up artificially from the public largesse. The eventual earthquake will be much stronger than it would if we'd had a couple minor ones and allowed the adjustments and the disturbances that always create innovation and fertile ground and awakening. If we'd allowed those disturbances to occur more organically or more naturally.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lua. And Green Meadow has a question for you, Joel.
There is a theory that we will be moving to a calorie economy, where exchange is based on calories. So food, fuel, and labor can all be described in calories available or calories burned. What do you think a calorie economy might look like?
This is, you know what? I'm going to beg off on this one because it's you know, it's the kind of stuff that focus groups do. You know, in general. Well, no, it's not a bad. And I'm not trying to diss the question. What I am just saying is, we have so many. I'll just answer this. We have so many things that we know we ought to do that are no brainers. I just think that innovation and a calorie economy. I think that it is so innovative and so creative that if in fact we are forced to go there, that most of us can't imagine what it would look like, and we might hit, if we get down to the question about illegal milk and stuff, you'll hear me really wax eloquent on this point. But I think that very few people can actually predict what things will look like in the future. I mean, in 1800, all the land in Great Britain was owned by 5% of the people. In 1900, it was owned by, 70% of the people. On my desk,
yeah, pretty much what we can say is.
On my desk, I have the book 1493. I mean, can you imagine the Incas sitting around thinking what their next 100 years would be, and then here in marches the conquistadors.
Yeah.
I just think there are so many unknowns out there that it's all I can do to try to keep up with what I know that I ought to do, and what I know that I can do, and what I know that I should do. That I don't think it's a silly question. I think it's just not a question that I have enough energy to spend a lot of time on.
Yeah. No, you've got a point there. Yeah, I think really what we have is we can expect change. Regardless of where we start, we can expect change.
Absolutely, you're exactly right. And so I'll tell you this: a calorie economy is going to make jumping in the Hummer to go 10 miles into town for takeout pizza. It's going to make that look a lot more expensive than it is today, and it's going to make the Air Force in Iraq, where they were using as much fuel to power all of that Air Force airplanes, I'll be off here, but I'm just making the point that in something like 30 days of fuel usage in just Iraq to just fly the planes, if that money were applied to, for example, the school lunch program, every single child in America would eat local artisanal like Kings for like 2 years. The money is in the system. The money is there. We just have a totally skewed value system of what we value, and so when you start looking at expensive energy, which is historically normal, when the average farm had to use 30%, at least 30% of all of its output just to feed its draft power. Imagine those kinds of things being real again, and in a time of expensive energy, that's exactly what would happen.
Thank you.
Joel, we're going to continue with Green Meadow, but we're going to go ahead and move on to the topic of politics and food.
Okay.
Okay.
This is one that I just hate.
Okay.
So, the fight to allow people to choose to consume raw milk or non pasteurized milk if they wish seems to be at the forefront of the battle for people to be able to choose for themselves what to eat. I'm not even sure why the government is making such a big deal of it since the rest of the world consumes non pasteurized milk. How is this battle going, and what implications do you think there are for consumers?
I'm glad we got to this question because this is near and dear to my heart. Here's the deal. We have a clash of paradigms in our culture, a real clash of paradigms between what I call the mechanical food system and the biological food system. These are very different ways to view food, farming, soil, everything. Is a living entity, is it fundamentally mechanical or is it fundamentally biological? There are huge differences. Machines don't get tired. Machines cannot forgive. Machines cannot heal. If a bearing goes bad, you can't give it an extra 2 hours of rest and have the bearing heal up. There are fundamental differences between mechanical and biological systems. And our culture right now, and our government and our industrial food system, essentially views life as a fundamentally mechanical thing, not a biological thing. And people like me, and probably most of you that are asking these questions, we view life as fundamentally a biological thing. Now, there are mechanical components. I mean, our elbows provide leverage, and, there are mechanical components. But you and I are far more than our spleen, liver, and backbone laid out on a table. We're not just a bunch of parts. We're living. We're beings. We're living beings that even include things that we can't see. Our ability to think and our ability to have ideas and respond and have instincts and that sort of thing. So when we come to food, when we come to this politics of food thing, there is a huge rift, if you will. There's a war. I'll just use the word. There's a war that's not unlike the war between the 7th Cavalry and the Native Americans over worldview. And I wish that these two worlds could live side by side. But unfortunately, it's very difficult, and apparently no culture has really found a good way for them to live side by side. And so here we are running pell-mell into a conflict that's a major conflict. So so where's this battle going? Well, where this battle is going, how is it going? Right now, it's going very, very poorly for our side because Monsanto and Tyson and the pharmaceutical companies, Johnson and Johnson and Merck and whatever, Pfizer, they basically own the regulatory agencies in government and are defining what is acceptable and non-acceptable food practice. And of course, they are working through the land-grant college system to get to credentialize it, and creating best management practices and good agricultural practices, GAPs or BMPs, depending on what state you're in. And these are becoming the new standard for what is insurable, what is legal, and of course, the best management practice, the BMP for poultry, is certainly not pastured poultry, it's Tyson poultry. The BMP for manure management systems is certainly not composting, it's lagoon slurry systems. The BMP for animal wellness is certainly not creating a terrain of wellness. It is pharmaceutically oriented. In other words, the difference between the mechanical and biological, when one of our animals gets sick, our first question is, well, what did we do to the terrain, to the habitat of this animal that allows it to compromise its immune system? Because there's something going on here that we're doing. It's our fault. Well, in the industry, when an animal gets sick, they just assume the animal is pharmaceutically disadvantaged and reach for the nearest drug. That's a fundamental difference. And so what happens is that a farm like ours, for example, gets turned in for animal abuse if we do not use a conventional bullet treatment, for example, for a sickness, and somebody happens to come by and see an animal and turns us in, calls 911. This has happened, so I'm not making this up. Turns us in for animal abuse, and then we're pulled in before a court to explain why we're using homeopathy or letting thyme or TLC or basic age soap or some nutritional treatment that works a little slower to justify that instead of the pharmacological approach. And so right now, I would like to think that our side is winning, but it's not. We are still, way less than 5% of the population. One of the sobering things I do, and I do a lot of speaking and traveling, and there'll be 1,000 people or something at this venue. We have a great time, and everybody just loves it, and they think I'm the greatest or whatever. But the truth is that within 5 miles of that venue, 10 times as many people as came and heard me speak visited McDonald's and Hardee's and Taco Bell and Long John Silver's and Burger King for dinner. And so, so what we've come to is it's now legal and perfectly fine to feed your kids Twinkies, Cocoa Puffs, and Mountain Dew, but it's illegal to feed them raw milk, compost-grown tomatoes, Aunt Matilda's, homemade pickles, and pastured poultry. Those are all hazardous substances. And so where are we going? I think it's going to become a lot worse before it gets better. And I know that our side is right, and I know that in nature's economic balance sheet and environmental balance sheet, our side is the truth. It's the only way that will ultimately prevail. But right now, we are a tiny minority. The other side has all the power and all the clout. And every time the consumer advocacy crowd asks for more government intervention, whether it's food safety laws or regulations or whatever, every time they ask for that, all sincerely intended, it ends up hurting people like us that are marching to the beat of a different drummer. And so, so I don't know where it's headed. That's why everybody needs to join the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. I mean, they are what I call them the NRA of food choice right now, and they're like a little kid with their finger in the dike, and they're creating a little bit of wiggle room. And we've already used them 3 times in 2 years. But Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund, one of my goals is that they would have a membership and a clout that's as powerful as the NRA. And when we have that, we won't have this kind of asinine food policy that currently prevails.
Yeah, they're actually the only charity I donate to. or only fund I donate to.
Yeah. Let me just finish with this too. This will jump me off the slope, but I think it's important to realize that a lot of this is being dominated by healthcare and wellness. If the government is responsible for my healthcare, then it's also responsible to determine if I'm eating or living healthfully. I mean, it has an economic interest in making sure that I'm not playing Russian roulette with society's money. And while that may sound well and good, if the wellness health assumptions were correct, the fact is that they are very incorrect. And we have, an example is just the food pyramid. You can trace, the government never even told us what to eat until 1970, 73, when the food pyramid came out, the first one that, of course, had grains on the bottom. And grain consumption in the U.S. In the last 50 years, now 1970, that was 40 couple years ago, but in the last 50 years, since the food pyramid came out, wheat consumption in the U.S. has doubled. Just think of the ramifications of all the credentials, all the power of the FDA and the USDA and all the credentialed government, experts pushing the nation toward a certain diet. And is there any wonder we're having, celiac disease and gluten intolerance when in just 50 years, I mean, that's only one generation. Think about, how slowly things evolve and adapt to climatic changes and different things, and to double consumption of wheat in 50 years for a civilization is just, it's just unprecedented. Historically, no civilization was able to change its diet that dramatically that fast because you simply couldn't transport things. You couldn't access new foods that fast. Nothing dietarily could have changed that rapidly ever in human history. And so what we have is this economic interest to dictate to us what to eat, and so until we move away from our welfare state, our socialist society, we will see more and more dictations coming from the powers that be that are wined and dined and owned by the largest players. Every single time the government penetrates into the marketplace, every single time the biggest players in that regulatory climate will immediately move to fill the regulatory positions in the government, that will move to get special concessions from the regulators, and every single time it prejudices the small players, the innovative players, and the diversified players, and augments and helps whoever happens to be the good players, the big players, not the good players, the big players at the time. That's the way it happens. And so I think that it's going to get much, much worse before it gets better.
Well, thank you for waking up people along the way. Hopefully we pick up some more.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Green Meadow. Joel, we're going to move on to Ground Rod next, who's going to be asking a question within the topic of creating change.
Yeah, some good thoughts there, Joel. This is a question from forum member Raw Truth. What do you see as the greatest needs for developing and extending this new food health knowledge network to the people beyond our present reach?
Yeah, what you're asking is how do we wake up the couch potatoes?
Right.
Oh me. Well, I'm sure you studied business cycles and innovation, and the most the most widely held one, I guess, is this the lunatic fringe, which is 1 to 3% of the population. And you have the early adopters that are like 3 to 10%, and then everybody else is a follower. And so, what's exciting about that model, if it is true, let's just assume that it is for a minute. What's exciting about that model is that you don't have to reach everybody to come to a tipping point. All you have to do is reach a certain saturation point. Sally Fallon, the founder of the Weston A. Price Foundation, says that all we need to get to is something over 5% of the food system, and at that point, the margins are so small in the industrial food system that we will be the game changer and make all the calls at anything over 5%. I think that's probably a little overly optimistic, but in recent years, we've moved suddenly from about 0.5 to 2 in the time it took us to go from 0 to 0.5. So there is definitely a movement this way, and I will say that our farm has been contacted by several very, very large institutions now to supply them. But to supply them, we have to get our stuff on a Cisco truck. Cisco truck won't allow us to come on until we have $5 million worth of product liability insurance, and an insurance underwriter won't insure us until we are certified to have best management practice agriculture systems. So you have this convoluted cycle. So there certainly is more market penetration. I would simply say that what it's going to take, I wish I had a magic sermon or a metaphor or something that was guaranteed to chop through the brain haze of everybody, but I don't. And I'll go back to my one tried and true thing. I do believe that it will take more disturbance. What will it take? It'll take more disturbance. It'll take more people getting cancer, more people getting type 2 diabetes, more people frustrated with the healthcare system, more people frustrated with the American Medical Association, start going to alternative therapists, go to Mexico, go to people that run these little machines. I mean, I go to this gal that has these little she has this little digital probe. You go in there, you hold these little copper things, and she has a dial there that she's looking at. And I mean, it's uncanny, and she's been a big help to me. I've actually had I'm having travel stress from being gone so much and traveling so much. It's creating some, it's subconscious stress, and so she's got me on an herbal dopotropic that's really done amazing things. And what it does is it just settles me down at that subconscious level. I'm not even aware of it, but it manifests itself in runny nose and nasal congestion, different things. Anyway,
got to take care of your health there, Joel.
Yeah, I do. Anyway, here's my point. There are 6 of these machines, and they're all completely under they're under guerrilla, non-public on the QT in America. In Europe, if you go in the hospital, you just walk in and everybody hooks up to this thing and they use it for diagnostic. In 5 minutes they tell you everything is wrong. Boom, you're up and running. Here, it's it's criminal. It's illegal. She's been raided and run out and so what's happened is we go to this gal. Our daughter-in-law got us involved with her. She got her over totally cured of Lyme's disease. Sherry was in a point for 6 months where she couldn't even walk. Daniel had to carry her up and down the stairs. That's our son, his wife, and now she's completely cured. Took a couple of years, but completely alternative. No medical doctor, no nothing. So she tells everybody, and so now this guerrilla doctor, I'll call her, comes every quarter and sees 50 patients, whatever. Listen. Here's the deal. Everybody's opt-out story. I love listening to people's epiphany. Everybody has their story of why they're eating our chicken instead of supermarket chicken? Why, we have this thing, you should kick the supermarket habit. I mean, people want us to be in the supermarket. I don't want to be in the supermarket. I don't want there to be supermarkets. Just that the whole thing is, just kick it, throw it away. And so as everybody's story, their epiphany is different. I mean, sometimes it's religious, sometimes it's health, sometimes it's a family member. It's amazing. Sometimes they see something on YouTube. I don't know. I'm fascinated by the number of different ways people have their wake up moment, their epiphany, and they're as different. They're just totally different. And I mean, I ran into one guy. His was when he realized he couldn't reach down and eat a carrot out of his garden, that he was scared to eat it until he washed it in chlorine to get all the chemical fertilizers off, and that was his epiphany. Everybody comes in a different place, and it's always disturbance that creates that, and so I think that as for example, homeschoolers opted out of institutional education and started the homeschooling movement. We are seeing now people totally losing faith with corporate food. I mean, during the 1950s and 60s, I mean, America just ran down that road. TV dinners and mac and cheese and Velveeta cheese, and we just totally embraced that. And now people, one at a time, are saying, you know what? I put my faith in those people, and it didn't work. And that wake-up call, that aha moment, is driving people to us. Every time there's a food recall, every time there's some E. coli outbreak, our phone rings, because people, a lot of times, that's their wake-up moment. And so, to answer the question, what does it take to reach the couch potatoes? I'm going to stick by the only way I know to reach them is more disturbance in their life. And if that means one day they get sick, I'm sorry, I don't want anybody to be sick. But you know what? If that gets you on the truthful bandwagon, then bring on the sickness.
Well said, Joel.
Thank you, Groundrod. Joel, our interview with you has been greatly anticipated and will likely be one of our favorites. On behalf of Time Monk Radio, thank you for spending time with us this evening and sharing your experiences, perspective, and wisdom.
It's been my honor. Thank you. It's been a privilege to be with you all.
Thanks so much for spending your evening with us here tonight.
Sure. Thank you for having me. There've been I had to bone up on these questions. Usually, they're kind of softballs, and I just kind of take them as they come spontaneously. But I told Teresa, I better read these and make some notes here, and I'm going to be caught flat-footed.
You weren't.
It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you
so much.
Thank
Y'all
you.
Take care.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.